Let's do it. Let's create a custom block entity in Minecraft. Alright, we found ourselves back in IntelliJ once more, and in this tutorial we're going to be adding a custom block entity to Minecraft. Now, a block entity, in theory, is simply a block that sometimes you can right-click, sometimes you actually can't, but it is basically a block with additional functionality, like, for example, any type of machine that you've seen in any other Minecraft mod, or, for example, a block entity in vanilla would be the furnace, for example. Now, as a complete preamble, I have updated to Forge 119.2 over here, 43.11. Just as a quick reminder over here, there should be no changes even if you're on 119 or 119.1. I'm pretty sure everything should work, but just to be sure, this is the current version that I'm using, so if there are any discrepancies, that might be the reason why. Whatever the case may be, block entities, they are quite complicated. And I'm saying this because, well, number one, now is really the time where some, foundational Java knowledge is absolutely required. We're going to copy over a few methods over here. I'm not going to go into insane detail on all of them. I'm going to try to explain everything as best I can, but we're going to be creating a lot of classes. We're going to be creating a lot of methods, and they're going to be all interrelated with each other. It's going to be pretty freaking crazy, but afterwards, we're going to have a really, really awesome block entity. All right, let's start at the very beginning by going to the block package, and we're going to make a new package in there called entity. And this is where our block entities will live, and that's going to be the first one. That is the gem infusing station block entity. Quite a long name, but that's going to be totally fine. Now, this will extend the block entity class as well as implements the menu provider interface. Let's hover over this, implement methods. It's going to get the get display name as well as the create menu method, and then we can hover over this again and make the constructor. Now, first of all, as always, if the parameters annoy you, you can click on them, press Shift F6 and rename them. I know that this should be the ID, I believe. This is, of course, the inventory, and then this is the player. Then also very important, in the gem infusing station block entity constructor, delete the first parameter. This is going to be fine. This error is totally okay. And then we're going to change this to pause and this to state. That's perfect. And that is actually what we need. For the component here, for the display name, we're just going to say component.literal. And I'm just going to call this the gem infusing station. That's going to be fine. If you want to do this proper, you should probably do a translatable component in this case, but that's going to be fine. And here for the menu, I actually want to make a deliberate error just so that I don't forget to add, well, the thing that I need to add in the future. So a block entity, or at least in our example, consists of 4 different parts. The block entity, the block itself, the screen class, as well as the menu class. Now, this might sound like a lot, and it actually is, but we'll see basically what each of those parts do and what we have to do for them. Now, first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a new item stack handler. This is basically the inventory of our block entity. It's going to be a private final item stack handler, and this is going to be called Itemhandler. This is equal to a new item stack handler. In the parentheses, we're going to put the size of the inventory. In this case, we're going to have 3 different slots, and then we're actually making an anonymous class, so we're going to put the curly brackets in here, and we're going to override the onContents_changed method, and I'm just going to call the setChanged method here. So this basically just, roughly speaking, reloads this particular chunk and or block position if, any type of changes here occur. And we will actually also need this method in the future as well for some synchronization, but we'll see that when we get to it. We actually also need something interesting, and that is a private lazy optional of type Itemhandler, called the lazy Itemhandler, and that is equal to a lazy optional.empty for the time being. Now we're going to need this in order to make our inventory available via capabilities. So for that, what we can do is we can immediately override this, and that is the get capability method. Now we want to override the one with the side, and that should be okay. What we can then do is we can just keep this return, and we can say, hey, if cap, so this is the parameter here, the capability that we're passing in. If this is equal to capability Itemhandler.Itemhandler capability, then we're just going to return the lazy Itemhandler.cast. And that is basically going to allow it so that we can, well, import and export items out of this particular block entity. Now, also very important, we also want to override the onload method as well as the invalidate caps method, especially when we have some capabilities like this because then in the onLoad method, what we want to do is we want to say the lazy item handler equals the lazy optional.of, in this case, a supplier, and then just passing in the item handler that we've made in the very beginning. There you go. And then in the invalidate caps, we want to invalidate this as well. Nope, we actually want to say lazy item handler.invalidate. And that should be pretty much fine here as well. Now we're going to continue with the reading and the writing method, or the save and the load method. So we're going to say save additional. That's what we want to override, as well as the load method. Now once again, let's just change this to calling this NBT. That's going to be fine. You know, compound tag, you could call it tag. NBT is totally okay. And what we want to do is, in here in the save additional method, we want to save the inventory. How do we do this? Well, we say nbt.put. And we're going to call this the inventory, and then we're going to say itemhandler.serialize NBT. And then we'll save the entire inventory. If we, for example, were to leave the world, right? If we were to save the world and, you know, come back like 2 days later, then of course we want the inventory inside of this particular block entity to be saved. So this is what we do to save it. And then to load it, we're doing itemhandler.deserialize compound NBT, nbt.getCompound. And then we're just getting the inventory over here. There you go. And that will be the saving and loading of the inventory done as well. Now, we will actually come back to this in just a moment, but for the time being, that's going to be fine. And then lastly, I'm going to actually copy over this method because that's a little bit more out to type and we don't really need that. All of the code is, of course, as always available to you in the description below. GitHub pass for an individual gist as well. We can see we're basically just making a drops method that will sort of drops the contents of all of this particular block entity. We're going to call this in a moment inside of the block class when the block would be destroyed. Then, of course, we would want all of the inventory to spill out and, you know, actually spawn in the world. Now, I believe that is all that we can do at the moment. The error is totally fine. We're going to fix that. For the time being, what we're going to do is we're going to now go into the block. Now, I've already made the gem infusing station block over here. Now, if you don't have this, just create a new one, basically. And what you want is you want this to extend the base entity block. Now, this will actually get us an error. We need to implement the new block entity method. That's going to be fine. We're going to deal with that in just a moment. Let me just make a comment over here just so that you basically know. So all of the things below this comment are basically the block entity stuff. The first thing that's incredibly important is override the getRenderShape method over here, and you want to return renderShape model. This is extremely important. If you don't do this, your block is going to be invisible. So keep this in mind, and there you go. We also want to override the onRemove method. Now, I will actually copy this over because, once again, it's just sort of one of those boilerplate methods that looks pretty much the same every time. And you can see we're just calling the drops method that I've just alluded to before. And that basically is going to drop all of the contents of the block entity inventory. We also want to override the use method. Once again, this will be copied over. Overall, this almost always looks the same, right? We're just making sure that we're on the server here. We're getting the block entity at this particular position. We're saying, hey, is this actually a gem infusing station? If it is, then open the screen. When we right click this, then we want to open the screen that this particular block entity sort of belongs to. And that is the general idea. Now, the new block entity, we can actually also use this. We can say new gem infusing station block entity. Now let's change the parameter names here, pause, and this is going to be this state over here. Oh, that's not quite right. This is pause. There you go. And this is state. Perfect. And then just pass in pause and state. And that should be fine as well. And then we need one more method in here, and that is the getTicker method. And what we want to do here is, first and foremost, also change all of the names over here, because man, are they kind of stupid. And I believe that we actually do have Parchment already available, but I've not yet been able to basically try it out. So we'll take a look at that maybe next tutorial as well. And then we want to call the createTicker helper method over here, passing in the type as the first parameter, and then we actually need the mod block entity registered. All right, let's do this then. So we're going to go into our entity package, right-click new Java class, and this is the mod block entities class. There you go. And inside of here, we just wanted to basically register our block entities. Now, how do we register block entities? Well, of course, with the good old friend of ours, the public static deferred register. Final deferred register even. This time of block entity type. And then once again, we need angle brackets question mark. In this case, this is going to be the block entities equal to, of course, a deferred register.create, forge registries.block entity types, very important. And then, of course, tutorial mod.mod ID. And I hear you scream already. Where there is a deferred register, there also is a public static void register method with an event bus called event bus. And we're going to call inside of it the block entities.register method passing in the event bus. And so that we don't forget about this, let's immediately call this mod. No, absolutely not this one though. Mod block entities.register and then passing in the event bus. There you go. Now we can actually register this. So once again, this is going to be one of those things I'm going to copy over. Actually, let's just type this out. Why not? Public static final registry object, right? Should be fairly self-explanatory. This time of block entity type of type gem infusing station block entity. So instead of here, we need to specify your block entity class. I'm just going to call this the block infusing station. I think that's going to be fine in terms of name. We're going to say block entities.register, then the name, just gem infusing station. Then a supplier of the following block entity type, this one right here, .builder, .of, and then a gem infusing station block entity, : new, comma, modblocks.geminfusingstation.get, and then after the second parentheses, .build, and then passing in a null. And then no more errors should be present in theory. Once again, you can of course copy this over from the GitHub repository or the gist as well, both linked in the description below. And in theory, this should be fine. In high-level overview, we're basically just making sure, hey, this particular block here belongs to this particular block entity. Roughly speaking, that's what we're doing. And then, of course, also registering the actual block entity. Now, we can fix two errors. That is, number one, in the block entity class right here. When we call the super, we can just say mod block entities dot gem infusing station dot get. That should fix this error. And then the same thing goes here. We can say mod block entities dot gem infusing station dot get. And that should be pretty much what we need here. Now, the last thing we need to pass in here is the gem infusing station block entity : tick. Now, this method, of course, currently doesn't exist. But what we can do is we can just create a tick method, and it will immediately make it so that it has the correct signature. So the correct method signature for us, we need a level, a block pause, a state, and an E here. Now, this E we actually don't need. Let's get rid of the generic right here, and we're just going to say this is a gem infusing station block entity. I'm going to call this entity. Actually call this P entity. I believe that is a little bit better. So then we can use this a little bit nicer, but that would pretty much be all that we need to do. This error should go away, and the block is now done. That's great. And now we can basically proceed in the block entity itself. Now, the tick method is special in that it basically gets called every tick. So every 1/20th of a second, this method gets called, and we can do all sorts of crazy things in here. Now, the first thing I have found is that if you call if we're on the client side, we just want to return this. I'm still not 100% sure whether or not this is like a thing that you should do, have to do, or shouldn't do. But I just have found that doing this makes a lot of sense in my mind. So it did work, and then we had some issues with this when we actually did have this. So I am unsure about whether or not we want to do this or not. Now, the question is, what do we want to do in this tick method? Well, let's just think about it like this. If we have some sort of recipe present in this block entity, we want to do something, right? Okay, that's actually fair. And what will this entail? Well, this will entail quite a few things when you really think about it. So let's just start typing this out, and then let's think about this. So we want to have a recipe, right? So if this particular entity has a recipe, then we want to do something. Maybe we want to, add some progress. Now we're thinking about, well, we don't really have a progress at the moment, right? Yeah, that is correct. So let's just add, 2 new integers over here that are basically denominating the progress of how far along the crafting process in this particular entity we are. Let me just search for the constructor. There this constructor is. So let's just add a private int progress. It's going to be 0, and then a private int, and that's going to be the max progress. So this is basically how long it's going to take. I'm just going to set this to 78. I've tried this around, and this is just a number that I've been using for a while. You can of course also change this, and it's going to take longer, of course. And then we also need, and this is extremely important, a protected final container data of type, or called data. There you go. And now this is going to get an error. That's fine. Now, the first question is, why do we even need something like this? Well, I've said that the block entity, at least in our case, is actually split into, roughly speaking, 4 parts. We're currently in the block entity, and inside of here, we have the ticking behavior. So we're basically, ticking up the data and the progress and all of that. We're then sending that progress or that data via a container data to our menu. Now, the menu is actually responsible for synchronizing the server data to the client. That means that we have to put this into a container data that then gets automatically synchronized, because the screen later, our display, our GUI that is going to open, right? And then, you know, you already know this from the furnace, for example. You can see the how long the coal is going to take and still burn, or how far along the smelting process in the furnace, for example, is. That is all on the client, right? Because that's literally only you see this. So that is why it needs to be synchronized. And the way that it is synchronized is in the actual constructor here. We want to say this data equals a new container data, this one right here. And you can see we actually need to do this. So this is an anonymous class once again. And what we actually want to do, I'm just going to copy this, the actual contents of each of these methods over as well. So you can see the get method over here. This is going to be called index in this case. That's fine. And we basically want to just return the progress over here if index is 0, and the max progress if index is 1. So we're basically saving both of these two, well, integers here inside of the container data. This is going to be, the first one is index, and the second one is the value. And then the count, of course, is how many there are. In our case, it's 1, 2. So we have two different variables that we're going to save in this container data. And we will need this in just a moment when we create the menu. But for the time being, this is going to be fine. Now, inside of the block entity itself, we can continue to work with our progress. So what we can say is pentity.progress++. So we're just increasing the progress. And we also want to call setChanged, passing in the level, the position, as well as the state. There you go. So that basically things get reloaded if they need to every time we add a progress, just in case. And then we also want to say we want to say pentity.progress. So we want to say get the progress. If this is bigger or equal to the max progress, actually, then we want to craft the item, right? So we're going to say craft item, and once again passing in the entity over here, and that's going to be fine. Now, maybe we want to do something else when it doesn't have a recipe. So maybe what we actually want to do is we want to reset the progress. Could be the case, right? So let's just say pentity.resetProgress. So once again, all of those different methods are actually things that are not yet implemented, but we were going to implement them in just a moment. And this is going to be a level, a position, and a state over here. And that should pretty much be what we want. So hopefully this roughly makes sense in the way that we want to add this, and let's then create all of those methods. So the hasRecipe method, the craft item method, and the reset progress method. There is no rhyme or reason to why I'm having some of them in static and some of them in non-static. Some people have said that why not make all of this non-static. I personally don't think that it matters that much. If there really is that big of a deal, then you can always, of course, change this as well. So resetting the progress should just be this.progress equals 0, right? That's just resetting the progress. Should be nothing too crazy going on here. Now the question is, what does it mean to have a recipe? That's a great question. So the first thing I actually want to do is I want to copy over something that is just going to make our lives a little bit easier. And that is exactly this. Let's just call this entity, then that's fair. And let's think about this. So the recipe here, we're just making a simple container. Basically, it's sort of an inventory that we have, that is going to be a little bit easier to deal with later. And then we want to make sure that we have certain things correct. So, for example, what I want to do is I want to have a raw gem in the slot with index 1, and when we have this, I basically want to then be able to say, hey, now I have a recipe. And there's a few other things that I also want to do. So let's say, for example, we have a boolean, and that is the has raw gem in first slot, right? Something like this, and then we actually want to equal this to the entity dot item stack item handler dot get stack in slot 1, right? If that item if that item is equal to, let's say, mod items dot raw zircon dot get, then, right, this is now the boolean, we can actually return, sure, if this is the case, then we have a recipe. Now, this, of course, is not quite enough in this case, because we also want a few other things to happen. And that is, number one, we want to make sure that we can actually insert the particular amount into the output slot, as well as insert the particular item into the output slot. So we want to say, for example, can insert amount into output slot, and then passing in the inventory in this case. And then we also want to make sure that we can insert item into output slot, passing in the inventory as well as the item that we're actually going to create. Now, in this case, we're just going to make a new item stack over here. No, a new item stack, not an item stack handler of type mod items dot. Let's go with zircon, of course, dot get, and we're just getting 1 over here. Let's just import this, and then with the 2 methods here, we of course need to once again create. So let's just create this method and this method as well. So just 2 Boolean methods, nothing too crazy. Now let's think about this. Can insert into output slot basically just is going to check whether or not we have enough space in there, right? So we're just going to say if the inventory dot get item to get max stack size is bigger than inventory dot get item get item to get count. So this basically will allow us to, well, only insert to 64 and not higher. Otherwise, of course, we would get into a little bit of a trouble, right? Because it would actually literally just do it. It would just go up and up to 65 and so on and so forth, which of course is not something we want. And the can insert into item slot, we're basically checking whether or not, first of all, the item inside of the inventory, right, is the same as the stack over here. So stack.getItem, right? If they're the same, or if the item in the inventory is actually empty. Because if it's empty, then of course we can insert any item, basically. So that is the general idea in this case. And that should be pretty much what we need to do in the hasRecipe method for the time being. Now we're going to actually change this in the next tutorial as well, where we're actually going to implement a proper recipe, like an actual JSON file recipe that we're going to read in with a custom recipe serializer and stuff like that. It's going to be very interesting indeed. That's going to be interesting. Now the question is, what happens in the craft item class? Well, here we're crafting the item. So what we can basically ask again is, well, do we have a recipe, right? Just in case, right? And if we have a recipe, now we want to actually change stuff. So we want to say, for example, we want to get the entity over here, right? So pentity.itemhandler, and we want to extract the item from slot 1. We want to extract one of those, and we don't want to simulate it. We actually want this to happen. So we're basically extracting one of our raw zircons. And we then want to set the slot in, like the actual item in the second slot. So this is going to be our output, which we're now setting. And that's going to be the Itemhandler.setStack in slot. It's going to be slot 2, of course, right? So this is our output slot. We're going to make a new item stack. And this is going to be of mod items.zircon.get. And we're going to make this so that this is pentity.itemhandler.get stack in slot. So we're going to get the already existing stack in the slot. We're going to get the count, actually, get count, and we're going to increase it by 1. So this is, of course, now completely, basically, hard-coded in this case, right? So both the item stack, like what is going to be like put into this is hard-coded, as well as how many of them we're getting. Both of those are hard-coded, and that's totally fine for the time being, but we're going to change this, as I said, in the next tutorial, basically immediately. And that is pretty much all that we need in the craft item method, and that should be the logic pretty much done. So this is the logic. The logic should now work. However, of course, we can't even look at it right now. We don't have a screen, we don't have a menu, and we still have this one right here, which of course is the menu. Like, that is the issue. So let's move on to creating the menu. Now for that, we're going to make a new package in the tutorial mod package. Right-click screen over here. And here we need 3 different classes. The first one is going to be the gem infusing station screen. The second one is going to be the gem infusing station menu. And last but not least, we also need the mod menu types class as well. Let's start with the menu, because that's going to be the craziest probably. So this is going to extend the abstract container menu, this one right here. Let's hover over this and implement the methods, the quick move stack method, as well as the is valid method or still valid method. Let's also create a constructor matching super. And then we're going to, well, start to actually copy over some stuff. So the first thing is going to be the field. This is going to be the block entity field. That's totally fine. We're also going to need a level field as well as a data container field. This is, of course, the data container that I've explained previously that basically synchronizes the data, because inside of this menu is where the synchronization takes place. So we actually want another and a different constructor. We actually want 2 of those, but let's just do one first. So that's going to be the gem infusing station menu. The first one we need is an ID. Then we want an inventory called INV. Then we want a friendly byte buff called extra data in this case. And then I'm going to basically make a second constructor. That's going to be the public gem infusing station menu. and that is going to take also in an integer ID. Also going to take in an inventory inv. It's also going to take in now a block entity, not a block entity type, a block entity, important difference here. So block entity called entity. And it's also going to take in container data called data. Now we're actually going to call the second constructor with the first. So we're going to say this and then passing in the ID. We're going to pass in inf. We're going to pass in inf.player.level.getBlockEntity extra data.read block position or read block pause, comma, and then we're going to make a new simple container data with two different, parts of this data. Now, this might look absolutely insane. What is going on? Well, first of all, this right here, the 2 right here, very important that this matches the amount of data that we're having right here, right? So this is 2, and this then has to be 2 as well. So that's very important, and the rest should be pretty much fine. So here we want to call the super. Now, the first parameter is actually going to be the registered menu, but we don't have that yet, so we just want to then pass in the ID here. We will then want to check the container size just in case, right? So check container size. We're going to get the inventory, and that should be 3. Once again, this is, of course, the size that we're giving right here to the item stack handler, right? This is 3, so we have 3 different slots, or we can hold 3 different item stacks. We're going to set the block entity equal to the entity that we're passing in here. Now this is going to throw an arrow. We can just hover over this and cast it to our gem infusing station. Block entity, we know that this should always be the case. And then we can say this level equals inf.player.level. We can say this.data is equal to data. And then we can proceed to adding a few methods. First of all, let's actually start at the bottom of this craziness. So we're going to add 2 helper methods. I'm just going to copy them over. Overall, you can go through them in your own time. They pretty much just add slots for the inventory as well as the hotbar for the player. They should always be in the same positions overall. If you need to change the positions because, for example, your inventory or your GUI is basically bigger, then you can always change them. I highly recommend going through this in your own time, figuring out it should not be too crazy. It's just a bunch of math basically on how to place and where to place the different slots. So it shouldn't be anything too insane here. And we want to call this right here. So we want to call the add player inventory first, passing in the inventory, and then add player hotbar, and then passing in the inventory again. So that should be fine in this case. And then let's actually, once again, go down here and continue with the craziness. So the still valid method, what it's going to do is we're actually going to call the still valid method, the top one right there from the container level access and stuff like that. We're also going to change the name over here to player. And then we're going to say this is the container level access.create. We're going to pass in the level. We're going to pass in block entity.getBlockPause. And then after the second parentheses, we're going to pass in the player. And then we're going to pass in modblocks.geminfusingstation.get. And there we go. This can be quite complicated when you look at it. It pretty much just means, hey, can we actually right-click this particular block at this particular position? And can we then open the container? That's pretty much all that we're doing here. And then we come to my absolute favorite method, and that is the quick move stack method, because this is something we're going to pretty much just completely ignore and not even care about in the slightest. I'm just going to copy over, number 1, a whole host of different fields as well as the entire method. And that is going to look quite like this. So the only thing that is very important here is this one right here. This is extremely important, so please pay attention. If you have different number of slots, this is what you have to change. This must be the number of slots that you have. Otherwise, when you shift right click or you shift click into this inventory, then it's going to crash. This always needs to be the same number as you have right here. So keep that in mind, and then you should be fine. Yes, we could go through this in half an hour or so, but you know what? We're just going to thank DZM07 here for making this available for us so that we can basically just use this, not worry about it, and just basically, just make this small and never look at this again, because the quick move stack method is just a whole bunch of math, basically figuring out, okay, if I shift click in what slot should this item end up in, and it's all sorts of craziness. So you can go through this in your own time once again. Otherwise, just copy it over and thank DZM07 for making this available, and then that's it. And that should be that method as well. Now we're going to need 2 other methods as well. That's going to be, more or less like custom methods. That is the isCrafting method as well as the getScaledProgress method. So the isCrafting method, of course, just checks if we're having any type of progress, because as soon as we have some sort of progress, we know that a recipe is available in the block entity, and then we can start basically showing the arrow and the progress, and that is what we are doing with the getScaledProgress. Basically, it's getting the arrow size and then just having it basically displaying as much arrow in terms of percentages as we have done with progress. So what else do we need? We need the custom slots, actually. And that's going to be done by doing this .blockentity.getCapability. So now we're actually checking for a capability, and we're going to check for the capability of Itemhandler over here, Itemhandler capability. And if this is present, then what we want to do is we want to say handler, and then basically make a consumer over here. And that is going to be the following, this.addSlot. And we can then make a new slot item handler, passing in the handler. Index is just going to count up from 0 all the way to whatever you want. And then we have a X position and a Y position. I'm going to show you where those positions come from in just a moment. Let's just duplicate this. Once again, the index just counts up. And this position is 86 and 15. And this position is 86 and 60. Beautiful. So those are our 3 custom slots where we can then later insert, our items basically into. Very interesting indeed. So overall, that's pretty fine. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to say add data slots and then pass in the data right here. Now this should be the entire menu class done. So that is pretty good already. So this might be a little bit crazy over here, but overall, we're just basically saying, hey, does this particular block entity actually have some sort of capability to handle items? And if it does, well, fair enough, then we can actually add our slots that we can then later use to, basically manipulate the items inside of the inventory. The only thing we need to fix is this one, but that's no worries at all. Let's go to the mod menu types method, or class rather, and let's just add once again, a public static final deferred register, of course, of type menu type, of type ? Absolutely. And that's going to be called menus. This is equal to a deferred register.create for registries menu types. And this is tutorial mod. Let's go tutorial mod.modID. There you go. And absolutely, of course, public static void register method with an event bus. Put event bus over here, making it menus.register, passing in the event bus, and there we go. Let's immediately call this, otherwise we might forget it, and that would be terrible. Mod menu types.register, passing in the event bus, and that should be fine right there. Let's go back here and let's actually create this. So for this, what we actually need is a helper method. I'm just going to copy this over. This is all available to you, of course, as well in the description below. We can see we're just making a register menu type method over here, and then just registering it with a name, and then making a iForge menu type, creating it, and passing in the factory here. And when we actually register this, we just want to say public static final registry object. No, absolutely not registry object, though. There you go. And that is the menu type of type gem infusing station menu. This is the gem infusing station menu. Absolutely. This is equal to the register menu type method that we've made, gem infusing station menu : new, and then passing in the name, which is of course gem infusing station menu. Beautiful. And that is it for this as well. We can now close this and go back to the menu class, say mod menu types, gem infusing station menu.get. And that should get rid of this error here as well. And then finally, we can also go into the block entity to our last error that is here, and we can actually create the menu inside of this one as well. So here we actually want to create the new menu. Now, luckily we have everything available here, so we could say new gem infusing station menu, passing in the ID, the inventory, as well as this and this.data. Very important. And there you go. That should be pretty much what we need in this case. And that also concludes the block entity class, actually. And the last thing that we need to do is just the screen. The screen is going to be very interesting indeed. So the screen is going to extend the abstract container screen of type gem infusing station menu. Also very important that this is done correctly. Hover over this, implement the render bg method. That's fine. And then let's create the constructor matching super as well. Let's once again just change the names over here. It's just a little bit annoying when they have this and are not mapped. We're definitely going to change this in the this is kind of a bummer. Let's do, this is actually partial tick. This is going to be the p mouse x, and this is p mouse y. Now, I just know that this is the case. For next time, we're definitely going to take a look at Parchment. I think that they should be available. And then most of these parameters are going to be absolutely mapped as well. Let's also get the render method over here. And I'm actually just going to copy this over because it's going to pretty much look the same anyway. We just want to render the background, pull the super, and then render the tooltips. So that should be what we need here. And then we just need some boilerplate code in the get background method, but we also want to init and all of that craziness. So first of all, we need a texture. Let's add the texture over here. So you can see this is just a resource location under textures GUI gem infusing station GUI. Now let's immediately add this texture. This is going to be under textures, of course, right under GUI. And then let's just copy over the actual texture for this. Infusing station GUI PNG. Perfect. There you go. And this is the beautiful GUI. And now everything should probably also make more sense, right? I've told you in the menu, where do we get those numbers from, right? Where do we get the X and Y values? Well, those are just the X and Y values right here. We're starting at 0, 0 right here. So this would be like 15 and 12, or what was it exactly? Yeah, 12 and 15. There you go. So this is at 12 pixels in this direction and 15 into this direction. And then the rest should pretty much be fairly self-explanatory, all things considered. We want to override the init method as well, and let's just keep it there because we're going to need this in the future as well. And now just some, other basic things in the render.bg method. So this is pretty much all boilerplate code. This is sort of just setting up like everything. Same with this one right here. This simply, this is actually the stack. Let's actually change this to people stack over here as well. There you go. So this basically just renders the texture. This texture right here that we've specified, that you've literally just seen, this is what gets created when we call this split over here. And then we want to actually make a new method that is the render progress arrow. Once again, I'm going to copy this over and I'm going to explain. I'm also going to call this right here a render progress arrow, passing in the post stack as well as X and Y. All right, that's going to be fine. And then the question is, okay, what is this doing? Well, first of all, we're checking whether or not we're crafting. Because if we're not crafting, we don't need to render any type of arrow, right? That doesn't make any sense. We only need to do this if we're actually crafting. And then there's a whole host of numbers over here that you're going to be like, wait, where did those even come from? Well, first of all, what is X and Y? X and Y is pretty much this position right here. So this would be the 0, 0, quote unquote, of our GUI. And then we're going into 105 and 33. Well, where is 105 X and 33 Y? What does that do? Well, it goes right here and then it goes down right here. Okay. So what does this do? Well, we're rendering the progress arrow. So this is where we start drawing it. Yes, exactly. Now, what are we drawing is the question. Well, we're drawing something that is at location 176, and that is right here. So we're basically drawing this arrow. How do we know like what size it is? Well, that's the last two parameters here. That is the 8. So we know that it's 8 in width. And then the height is, what is the height? Get scale progress. So depending on how far we are along, we're drawing more or less of this arrow. That is what happens in this blip method. I can just say that the blip method can be quite complicated if you're looking at it for the first time. I highly recommend playing around with this a little bit, trying to understand what is going on here and changing around those numbers. Once you understand it, it actually is not as crazy as you might think, but it is just going to take a little bit of time to sort of understand it. Now we need to register this craziness, of course, as well. So the screen here needs to be registered. Let's go to our tutorial mod class over here and let's register it. So this is going to be in the on-client setup event here, and that's going to be the menu screens.register, passing in the mod menu types.gem infusing station menu.get, and then gem infusing station screen : new. No errors should be present, and everything should be properly registered and everything should be done. It sounds pretty good. I would say, looking at it, it should all work. So let's go into the game and see if it works. All right, fans of in Minecraft. So let's just try and right click one of those blocks. And there we go. That's already a very, very good start. Of course, this and this is like, those are spoilers. We're not going to discuss what those are in just a moment, but let's actually just get a few raw zircons. And in theory, what should happen is that if I take this raw zircon in here, we should see an arrow appear right here, and then at the end, we should get a normal zircon out. That is already a great start over here, and then once it's done, bam, a zircon is there. That's actually perfect. Let's see if we just put this in here, and then everything should work totally fine. We can see we're just getting more and more zircons over time. I can close out of it. It's going to run, without me looking at it as well. So if I, just run around, la la la, oh, a nice cow here, goodbye. Thank you very much. And then I can go back and we should have even more zircons. There you go. So it continues to run basically and everything works. If I destroy the block, there you go, everything drops as well. So this is pretty awesome indeed. Now there's actually one tiny thing that we want to add as well, because that I may or may not have forgotten something. I know it's absolutely crazy, but that is already pretty freaking awesome to have a custom block entity in Minecraft. Now, luckily, I still thought about it, and that is saving the progress as well. So I highly recommend what you do is you do nbt.put over here, or actually put int, and we're going to save the gem _infusing_station.progress. There you go. And then just saving this.progress. Absolutely. And then we're doing the same thing right here. We're actually doing it the other way around, though. We're going to say progress is equal to nbt.getInt. And we're just going to get gem infusing_station.progress. Beautiful. And then the progress is also saved now when we actually would, unload the world and reload the world later. So that should be pretty fine indeed. Now that should actually conclude everything. I can definitely say, it is quite a complicated topic and there are, all sorts of different things to do here, but it just is what it is. If you've gone through making the block entity once or twice, then you're gonna get way more of a feel for it, how everything works, and we'll basically continue working with this block entity for, let's say, like the next couple of weeks or something like that. Definitely the next couple of tutorials. Whatever the case may be, hopefully found this useful and you learned something new. I would very much appreciate a like from you if you did. Otherwise, I will see you all next time. So, yeah.